Great. I would like to welcome Mark Fine from Andrews Cooper, and he has a presentation on how to de-risk your projects. So Mark, if you are ready to go, I'm going to make you the spotlight video. There you go. Take it away.
Okay, and hello and welcome everyone. My name's Mark Fine. I'm the Director of Marketing Development at Andrews Cooper, which is a local engineering development firm. I've got more than 30 years experience taking new products to market. I've had key roles in several major breakthrough medical devices, such as the Diasonics first digital ultrasound imaging system, the Technar first biplane prostate imaging system, and the SRI Da Vinci surgical robot system, which at the time we called augmented reality or the synthetic vision system. I have a graduate degree in public health from UC Berkeley and undergraduate degrees in nursing and in psychology. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to de-risk your projects. And this is kind of focused on medical devices, but hopefully it's got wider applicability. First, the bad news. Developing a new product is really hard. Some people say it's akin to nailing the wings, bolting the wings on a plane in midair, or changing the tire on a car as it's going down the road, but it's always a challenge. But here's another insight is technology problems are easy, or at least relatively easy, compared to people problems. And with technology, if you have enough time and resources, you can solve pretty much about anything. But at times people can be frustrating, cranky, cynical, irrational, and stubborn. And that's on a good day. So sometimes I think that my degree in psychology is more useful than all the technical skills I've developed over the years. And we'll talk about that a little more. But here's good news. You can decrease your chance of failing from 90%, which is kind of how VCs look at the world. If they can bet 100, they think they're doing pretty well. If 1 out of 10 investments actually pay off, they just expect the other 9 to fail. And if you can decrease your chances of failing down to 50%, you're in really great shape. And there's some things you can do to de-risk your projects, and that's what I'm going to be talking about. Oops. The main focus really should be keeping your eye on the ball. Most projects and products fail because people don't keep their eye on the ball. They forget, they might look at the technology, but they don't look at the market, or they might look at how much money they have in the bank, but they don't look at execution. So you really need to pay attention to all 4 of these at the very least. And technical risks can include anything from, is this pure research? Is this something that people have done before and you can piggyback on that, or do you have to invent something brand new? And how many innovations are in this? Then execution risk. Can your team, do they have the skill to actually pull this off? And the best insurance policy you can have is have the most experienced, skillful people possible on the team. The key to winning is have really great people on your team. Financial risks can be anything from running out of money or not being able to raise money, or running out of money and then having to raise more money, hopefully at a better valuation. Other financial risks include the economy in general. So you have to look at all of that, both the macro and the micro economics. Then market risks. There's nothing more frustrating than building something that nobody wants. You really want to make sure that there's a market for that. So if you take a look at all of these things, you'll be well on your way to decreasing most of the really stupid mistakes most people make when they start companies or launch projects, and you'll increase your chance of success. Another market risk is forecasts. A lot of business plans I've seen say things like, if we can just capture 1/10 of 1% of the market, it's $1 billion company. But forecasts without historical data really aren't worth the paper they're written on. And someone said that, you can throw the plans out the minute, the first bullet is fired in battle. And the same with marketing. You can have all the great forecasts in the world, but you should really take them with a grain of salt. So this is a framework developed by NASA, and it's been modified a little bit, but they called it a different name, but I call it innovation readiness level. And when you're on the far left, where it's just an idea, is where you have the greatest risk. And when you're on the far right, and you actually have gone through, put a lot of the risks in the rear view mirror, and you've got something that works, you're hopefully minimally viable product that you're ready, you've got the least amount of risk. Now all you're looking at is market risks. In medical devices, you've got the additional burdens of regulatory issues, requirements, the FDA, quality medical systems, and all of that. But what you really want to do to minimize your risk is just have a steady progression from left to right, from research to development, validation to commercialization.
Yeah.
Okay. So this should be familiar, I hope, to most of you who've been involved in developing products or managing projects, is the 3 Fs, form, fit, and function. It doesn't do you any good to develop something that no one's going to use because it just doesn't fit. It's too big, it's too unwieldy, it's too heavy. So these are the really obvious things that you need to look at, and unbelievably, people ignore this sometimes at their own peril. But there's a 4th F, and that's focus. One of the single largest causes of failure that I've seen is lack of focus, and you can run out of money. You can have feature creep. You just keep on adding more and more requirements. You can be going after too many markets rather than focus on the low-hanging fruit. And the last is short attention span. You can be working on too many projects at the same time. And even large companies have trouble working on too many projects. And if you're a small company, you better focus. Major cause of failure. I've seen it too many times. So if you can really focus on what you're doing and getting it done, you'll be in better shape than most. I like to say that in assessing medical devices, whether they're going to be a success in the market or not, I look at the 3-legged stool, the cost, reimbursement, standard of care. And when I meet with physicians, these are the questions they always ask me, which is, how much does it cost? Is there a CPT code? In other words, how much am I going to get paid for it? Because if I can't pay, if the device doesn't pay for itself, most physicians these days just simply can't afford to buy it. And that's true of hospitals as well. And the standard of care is 2 parts. One is if it's a standard of care, if you don't do it, there's a misadventure, there's a problem, you have a lot of legal liability. But the other issue is if you don't use a device, but the hospital across the street has it, such as the latest surgical robot, chances are your patients are going to go across the street. So physicians also ask who else is using it, because they often are very conservative and they want to look at evidence and they want to look at publications. They don't necessarily want to be the first. The early adopters are great, but you can't count on them long term. And lastly, for a new technology, they'll say, who's going to show me how to use it? So it's important to take those things into consideration. So having said all that, I'm going to talk about 3 products or devices that I've got my fingerprints on some way or another, either directly or indirectly, and see if we can apply any of these lessons of how to minimize and decrease risk. Prostate ultrasound became an important technology several years back because prostate cancer is one of the most common causes of cancer in men. It's said that if you live long enough, if a man lives long enough, he will have prostate cancer. Probably won't kill him, he'll probably die of something else first, but it's pretty ubiquitous. The big issue is, and it's the same with breast cancer, which ones are fairly benign and you don't have to worry about, or you can be rather conservative in your treatment management, watchful waiting, or conservative treatment, which cancers are aggressive and you best, treat them, surgically or with chemo or radiation. And differentiating is really important and part of the diagnostic workup. So years ago, when ultrasound came into play, there were two flavors of ultrasound machines available. One, they both cost about $80,000. They both were the size of refrigerators, but the flavors were either one that would give you a long axis view or one that gave you a transverse or a short axis view. And in medical imaging, radiologists and physicians are used to having orthogonal views or 90-degree views. And for instance, a chest X-ray, you have an AP and a lateral view. And having to decide which ultrasound machine to purchase, because most of them couldn't afford two machines, it was a real dilemma because both views were really important. And it seemed pretty obvious to me that you needed a biplane or a multiplane system to meet that need. So I joined up with a company in St. Louis, Missouri called Technar, and we developed the first biplane ultrasound imaging system. And they said it couldn't be done. You know, that's why people hadn't done it. It was very difficult to put all the mechanics into this small little probe. So the first design that the mechanical engineers came up with, I don't know if you can see my arrow, but it looked like this rolling pin up on the top. And when I saw that, I kind of freaked out because I thought, my first thought is, we're doomed. If a patient saw anything like that coming at them, they would jump off the table and run out the room, and the urologist would never see them again. And I imparted that to the engineers, and they said, well, you know, it's impossible. The mechanism is so complex. We've got so many pieces in there. It's like a Swiss watch and all the motors and all that stuff. We just can't make it smaller. And I don't know how many times this has happened to you, but in my experience, whenever an engineer tells me something's impossible, I just have to wait about a month, and then they come up with a solution to the thing that they said was impossible. So a month later, voila, they came up with this. And I couldn't find a really great picture of the Technar ProScan because it's been out of the market for a while, but for a while it was the #1 seller in the world. We thought we were going to sell $1 million worth the first year. We sold $1 million worth the first month. It cost half the price of the big systems. It weighed 40 pounds instead of 200 pounds. It had twice the resolution, and it had the biplane capability. And it took the competitors 5 years to catch up. They didn't want to cannibalize sales of their expensive machines, which was a foolish mistake they made. So one way to de-risk your projects is sometimes you just got to pivot and bite the bullet. And if it looks like there's a disruptive technology, jump on the bandwagon. So there were a lot of lessons we learned. One is just because someone says it's impossible doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means it's difficult. We followed our vision. And we also had a fair amount of luck because after we developed this and we did some early clinical trials, we thought this is really great, but who cares and who's going to buy it? And that same month, a fellow named Thomas Stamey, who was the chief of urology at Stanford, published a paper in a journal, and he basically said, prostate ultrasound is really important and useful. Everybody should be using it. So that piece of luck really helped us a lot. And we got tons of support from luminaries. And it was a really good feeling to make that work. So we sold the company years later after we pretty much owned the market to a company called Mentor. And they did something a lot of companies that, bigger companies that purchase smaller companies do, is they just sat on the technology. They didn't do any innovation, any improvements. And within a few years, all the competitors just ate their lunch. And this product, sadly, my baby went away. But there's still plenty of out there, and I run into urologists at meetings. They're still using it and they love it. So that made me feel pretty good. So vascular access. A lot of times, if you haven't draw blood or something, you see the phlebotomist just kind of palpates your vessel and sticks a needle, and they get pretty good at it. But when physicians are putting lines in for what's called the central line placement, or PICC line, into a large vein like the subclavian or the internal jugular, and they're in the neck next to the carotid artery. The standard of care years ago was they would just use anatomic landmarks, and what we used to say is, close your eyes, shove the needle in, and hope for the best. And most of the time that worked, but when it didn't work, it was catastrophic. You could cause a pneumothorax by puncturing lung or bleed in the carotid. So those things were what we call ungood in medicine. So my brother is an anesthesiologist, professor of anesthesiology at the University of Utah in Salt Lake. And he called me up one day and said, you know, Mark, you know about ultrasound. Could you modify one of your systems so I could actually see the anatomy and watch the needle go where I want it to go? Because that would decrease the risk. And in difficult cases, I think it would be really useful. And I said, yeah, that sounds useful to me too, we'll do it. So we put together a system and we used it, and wow, it worked fantastically. We could see the anatomy beautifully. We could make sure we were putting the needle where we wanted it to go. And we thought, this is great. And one of the things that kind of validated our impression of the utility was that my brothers, the residents, would break into his office if they had a difficult case and steal the machine from them so they could put in a line that they thought was too risky to do without ultrasound guidance. So we thought, man, we've got a winner. So we took the system and we had some poster sessions and white papers and presentations, and we took it down to the American Society of Anesthesiology, the annual meeting down at Moscone in San Francisco, and we showed it off. And we thought people were going to just tell us how great it was and how they couldn't live without us. And the response we got was underwhelming. Mostly the anesthesiologists would say, see these hands? I never miss. I don't need no stinking ultrasound. And that's borrowed from the treasurer of Sierra Madre. So we thought, wow, this is really disappointing. So we just kind of put it in the closet and worked on other projects. Meanwhile, a physician named Leonard Skolnick took up the charge. He was a radiologist, and he said, you know, I think this is a good idea. We just need data. So he spent, I think, he started a company called Dimex, and he spent the next 10 years collecting data and validating this and publishing papers, and really showed the utility. And I think the insurance companies and the hospitals administrators finally kind of got it, that the legal risk and liability of not using ultrasound for central lines was too great not to use it. So it started getting some traction, and about that point, Bard in Salt Lake acquired the technology, and they built it into a #1 bestseller called the Bard Site, and there are tens of thousands of these, I'm sure, all over the world. It's a beautiful system. And they've made improvements over the years, and it fit in really well with their market because they also sell the trays and the catheters and all the needles and stuff going along with it. So I think the moral here was timing. You know, in Silicon Valley, we used to have a saying that you could tell the pioneers, they're the ones with the arrows in their backs, and we were just a little too early. And we don't begrudge Dimex or Bard at all for this, because they put in the hard work that we didn't do, and they made the investment, and I think it really paid off for them. So it's now not optional for physicians to use ultrasound guidance when they're putting in central lines. It's a requirement. It's mandated. Thou shalt use ultrasound if you're putting in a central line. So it went from I don't need this to gotta have this. So that was a really great project, and I'm glad that I had something to do with it. And lastly, the Intuitive Surgical was a company started by Dr. Fred Moll, who had the vision to acquire this technology from Stanford Research Institute, SRI International. So I was on the team that SRI that developed this robot under the guidance of Phil Green, who was running the biomedical engineering lab, my boss. And this project was funded by Department of Defense. And their vision was that they didn't want surgeons to be in harm's way in the battlefield. They wanted them to be able to operate far away from danger to work on injured soldiers. So the DoD funded this. So we eliminated one of the risks. We had lots of money. We had support from the DoD. And we had this most incredible team of mechanical engineers who had done something people had never done before, which is to develop this remote surgery system. And at the time, we called it telepresence surgery. So one of the things I did was I made a video of the robot threading a needle. which was pretty amazing. And we showed that video at a meeting in San Diego called Medicine Meets Virtual Reality down in San Diego, and people were really impressed by it. But they said, there's no way they're ever going to let you use this on a human. It's just not going to happen. The FDA is never going to clear this because, you know, you're across the room from the patient and you're not seeing them. And it's just not going to happen. Well, Fred Moll, as I said, had the vision, and his vision was so good that he started 3 more robotic, or maybe 4 more robotic surgical companies after Da Vinci. And, you know, many of them have billion-dollar valuations. So this system that people said no one will let you use it, there are more than 5,500 of these million-dollar systems spread around the world. And there's probably a handful within 50 miles of where you're sitting right now. They're ubiquitous. They're used for everything from cholecystectomies, which is removing the gallbladder. In fact, one of the first cases we did was a surgeon in New York removed the gallbladder of a patient in Paris using the Da Vinci surgical robot. We had really fast lines, communication lines to do that. So the benefits of robotic surgery is you have all the benefits of a laparoscopic surgery, which is a very small incision, which means faster healing, less trauma for the patient. But you have the benefit of you have feedback, tactile feedback, haptics, and visualization that you normally don't get in laparoscopic surgery. So you have all the benefits of what we call open surgery, where you make a large incision and you have got a great view of the operative field. And you've got great feedback because you're actually holding onto the instruments, but you don't have any of those downsides because you're operating through a very small trocar or a tube, and everything's intuitive about it because when you put an instrument through a tube, you're moving your hand back to make the instrument go up, which is counterintuitive and it's difficult. It was very, very successful. I'm glad they let us do that. And I think the moral was have a lot of support, have the vision, and have a partner willing to work with you and have faith in what you're doing and be really well funded. So that's kind of, oops, what happened there. So this is from Austin Powers, one of my favorite movies. They said it couldn't be done, so I've done it. And I think you really have to have this attitude if you're going to be successful. So you have to be have a great attitude, but you also have to be smart. And the way to be smart is to eliminate as many risks as you can by looking at the technical risks, the execution risks, the financial risks, and the market risks. And even then, you may not succeed, but at least you have a better chance. And for sure, you're going to learn something. So here's a pro tip. If I had bought this book, I've started a bunch of companies, I would have saved hundreds of thousands of dollars avoiding really bad mistakes and just misstarts and doing stuff I should have known better. And there are a lot of really good business books and books about developing products, but this book is the Bible, I think. It should be at the top of your list. And if you haven't looked at it, take a look. The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. It could even save your company and it'll make your life so much better. So one of the really fun jobs I had was I was the director of a $50 million nonprofit foundation in the Seattle area called MissionWise. And we were hired to basically train nonprofits how to be sustainable. Because a lot of nonprofits, their heart was in the right place. They had great missions, but they thought money was evil. And a lot of them went out of business when their grants ran out, so they couldn't accomplish their mission. So we were brought in to basically teach them about finance and marketing and PR and how to keep the doors open. So we had a team of consultants and we traveled around the country training these wonderful groups. And I'd usually kick off the training sessions with this kind of lighthearted overview that people thinking and feeling good about it. So like I said before, technical problems are relatively easy. People problems are hard. And I think my degree in psychology may have been more useful than a lot of the other technical training I've gotten. And I don't know if you recognize my uncle Sigmund Freud. He's not really my uncle, but growing up, my father, who was a psychiatrist, had a picture of him up on our mantelpiece, so I figured he must have been a relative. He wasn't. The one with the plan wins. If you go into a meeting and if you have a plan, the chances are it'll get adopted, because most people don't have a plan. They have complaints, they show you problems, they want someone else to fix it. But if you've got a plan, you've got a good chance of being successful. This should be familiar to anyone who's had term papers due or assignments due. Nothing happens without a deadline, and this is very true in projects as well. Deadlines kind of make things happen, and without deadlines, everything just expands to fill the space you give it. So this applies to your project, but also applies to launching, rockets into space. You got to do the full burn and go full blast, because otherwise you'll never achieve orbit or escape velocity. So you got to be committed, because lack of commitment could kill you. So one way to de-risk your project is to make sure everybody on your team is on board 100% and totally committed. My friend Dan Millman, who's an Olympic gymnast, shared this with me. A little bit of something is better than a whole lot of nothing. Just get something done every day. That overcomes paralysis by analysis. Just keep on moving forward no matter what. So this is true, and it relates to the next slide as well. Putting Band-Aids on problems doesn't solve the problem. A colleague of mine used to say, face it, trace it, and erase it. You got to acknowledge what's going on. Otherwise, it's just going to be a futile effort, and it'll be very disheartening. And related to that is you got to get the elephant out of the room. Almost every project I've been involved in, there's stuff that people know that's going on and nobody wants to deal with it because it's uncomfortable or it's risky, or there's a taboo against discussing it. But believe me, the sooner you put it on the table, the sooner you can deal with it. So it's important to acknowledge problems. That way they can be dealt with. So this was shared to me by a cardiac anesthesiologist I was working with, doing an open heart case. And I was asking him why he was using a certain monitoring device. And he said, without this, you're just guessing, and most of the time you'll guess wrong. So good examples, a medical example is half the kids who get antibiotics for ear infections don't need them, but we don't know which half, because they might have a viral infection, they might have a bacterial infection. And so pediatricians are stuck with kind of guessing and hoping they get the right answer. And someone once said, hope is not a strategy, and that's very true. So if there were a medical device that could actually tell you if you're a patient would be appropriately respond to antibiotics, that would be a really good thing. So I know a bunch of companies working on that. Bringing it back down to practical levels, how many times have you stopped at an intersection not knowing whether you should turn left or right? I don't know about you, but half the time, 80% of the time I get wrong and I go right when I should have gone left. I don't know how that works. It's like the universe has a sense of humor or something. So just important to know that guessing, if you've got data, that will increase your odds and decrease your risk. And this in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice, and in practice there is. This saying has been around for a really long time, and it's been attributed to a lot of different people, but it's really true. And once the rubber meets the road and you've got to actually solve a problem, this will become very evident and apparent to you, because a theory can only take you so far. So every top athlete has a coach, and every top person in business has a coach. I imagine even Elon Musk has a coach. Don't know if Steve Jobs ever had a coach. Actually, I think he did. you should have some help. There are a lot of people out there more than willing and able to help you out, and you'd be very wise to accept that. They can really help a lot. If you have a mentor, wow, fantastic and good for you. And I think it's obligatory that you pass that forward, and that as you get more and more experience, it would be very useful and a good thing for you to basically coach and help out folks coming up too. This is true. Things will go wrong. You can count on it. It's 100% predictable. Things will come up, things that you didn't anticipate, and you need a plan B and a plan C and maybe a plan D. So the ability to pivot, to deal with issues as they come up is, and having that flexibility and creativity is one of the best ways you can de-risk your project. If you have blinders on and very focused and narrow-minded in a sense and inflexible, you increase your risk a lot, because you won't have the wherewithal to basically adapt to changing situations, and situations will change. In medicine, we're burdened by more and more regulations every year between the FDA and all the other requirements. It seems like there's more and more paperwork, more and more time, money, and energy are required to get a product to market. And I used to be puzzled by this. And so I was talking to a colleague of mine. We were in public health school together at Berkeley, and he took a job with Department of Health and Human Services. And I ran into him and I said, why is it that every year y'all create more work for us out in the world trying to get our jobs done? It just seems very counterproductive and very inefficient. And it seems a mystery to me. And he said, it's no mystery at all. He said, think of it, put yourself in my shoes. I go to my boss for my annual review, and my boss says, so what have you been doing? What are you up to? What do you accomplish? And if I said, oh, nothing, everything's going really well, everything's great, I don't get a raise. But if I say, well, I created these 5 new requirements and instruments and questionnaires and forms for everybody to fill out, it looks like I've been really busy, and my boss says, great job, keep it up, I get a raise. So these things just don't come out of nowhere. They're kind of have a life of their own. There's no solution. It's just going to get worse and worse, and it's a burden, but it is the way it is. So I had talked a while ago about the nonprofits who, thinking money was evil, and I would say, look, as an example, if you're Meals on Wheels for seniors, if you don't have any money, you can't fulfill your mission. You're out of business, you close your doors, and a lot of seniors don't benefit from your services. So you better have a way to ensure that you have enough money to continue your mission. You need that margin. And the same with every for-profit companies as well. You better make more money selling it than it costs you to make it. And there's an old joke about the tailor selling suits. He lost $5 on every suit, but he said he'd make it up in quantity. You can't do that. You have to make money or you're out of business. So that's a ball you got to keep your eye on. So this is one of my last and favorite slides. Things are going to get tough. You can count on it. And I remember I was in a conference with a bunch of CEOs and venture capitalists. And one of the VCs who was giving a talk said, how many in this room, how many of you CEOs lie awake at night just terrified, sweating with fear and anxiety over some business issue of your startup? And like every single hand in the room went up. So it's guaranteed that there are going to be some hard times, and it's going to be stressful, and you've got to be resilient. And it can be tough. And the antidote to that is to remember why you got into this. I was the medical director of a community nonprofit clinic in the East Bay, La Clínica de la Raza, years ago, and we were at each other's throats, the different departments, administration, the medical department, everybody was just battling constantly. So I hired a consultant, a fellow named George Pransky, who's up here in La Conner now, and he billed himself as a marriage counselor for companies in trouble. And he was going to come in and help us straighten things out so we could be more productive, because we were wasting a lot of energy battling each other. So he met with the group, and he met with us individually, and then he met with me separately, and he said, Mark, you're the problem. And I said, me? Moi? I'm the problem? How can that be? And he said, because you've got a really bad attitude. You know, you're just upset all the time. You're stressed out. You know, you're looking for people to make mistakes. You know, you're finding problems everywhere you look. He said, do you remember how you felt when you first joined the clinic, and why did you take this job? And I said, oh yeah, I wanted to make a difference in the world. I wanted to contribute. It was a mission I believed in. He said, yeah, you got to remember that. You forgot to love your job. That was your problem. I felt like this huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. And it just made a huge difference. I just had to go back, like, why am I here? And it took a lot of, you know, I had to let go of a lot of stuff, and it was a humbling experience. But it really worked out well in the end. So remember, when things get tough, remember why you did this, and remember you got to love it. So that concludes my talk. And just a little about Andrews Cooper. We've been in business over 20 years, offices down in the Portland area, one in Lake Oswego, another in Corvallis, another in McMinnville, and an office near Seattle and Buffalo. We have over 100 engineers covering EE, ME, computer science firmware. We partner with a lot of companies. Many of our customers have been with us, or partners have been with us for over 10, 15 years. They keep working with us because we deliver superb results on time, on budget. Our company was started by Mr. Andrews and Mr. Cooper, who had worked at Hewlett-Packard down south of Portland. And when HP packed up and moved back east, they decided they didn't want to do that. So they started this consulting firm. So it's a joy to work with this group. We would love to hear from you if we can be of service. And I want to thank you for your time and attention. And now I'd like to open it up to questions, because we've got quite a bit of time.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mark. Thanks so much. I'm gonna take your spotlight video off. And thank you for such an engaging and interesting presentation. I loved your stories. I especially loved your very last pearl, which is about love the job that you have. Why are you here? You know, why are you doing what you're doing? And it's so easy to forget about that when all these other issues come up and they take precedence. So I'm going to look at the chat and see if anybody has any questions. Somebody did have a comment. Barbara Gaston said, very interesting and great tips. If anyone has a question for Mark, please put it in the chat, or you can unmute your microphone and go ahead and ask it. So we'll just give a second here. The products that you have worked on over the years are so interesting. I mean, it was really fun to hear about those. Awesome.
Yeah.
Anybody got any questions? One person asked earlier if we would be sending out the slides afterwards. Are the slides, can I attach those to the email I send out to people? Okay.
Absolutely. So I'm looking at the attendees. I see a lot of friends. Hi, Roman.
Yeah, I think you do know quite a few people, and some people have had to leave the call a little bit earlier, but I think you do know quite a few.
Hi, Mark. This is Matti.
Hi, Mati from Israel.
Nice to see you and to listen and to find that you are in a new, amazing place.
Yeah.
Keep in touch.
Yeah.
So one of the things I've seen in the past are two things. One is failure to embrace the idea of a design freeze. And the other one is allowing the engineers to actually go fully through designing your final product.
Yeah.
What's been your experience in those things in terms of companies that ended up with a big oops?
Yeah, that's a problem. It's there's a section. I'm writing a book called "Hacking Sales and Marketing for Engineers." You know, a sneak peek into what goes on outside the walls of your lab. And one of the things I talk about is games engineers play, and one of them is failure to freeze designs. You know, engineers could just go on forever and ever and ever. So somebody has to say, put a fork in and it's done, you know, and these next features will be in the next release. So yeah, that's a risk. So someone's got to.
Can you go back outside? I'm gonna ask a question on here.
Okay.
Sorry, keep going, Mark.
That's all I had to say about that.
Okay.
Yes, I agree with you. Those are big problems.
Megan, did you have a question?
Hi. Yeah, so I'm Megan Martin. I'm actually a commercial insurance broker. And when I first saw this, I thought insurance might come up somewhere in here. And I guess my question more is from a broker standpoint, obviously we work with the insurance carriers, but do you ever find your broker helps you out de-risking some of these problems or processes that you have and you work closely with them? Or is that something that is more needed in the industry?
Insurance is important because there's liability in many areas, and having a broker who's knowledgeable and willing to work with you and navigate this, because this, you know, you've got areas of expertise that we know nothing about. I mean, it's a really different domain. Yeah, it's really critical. And you offer so much more than just writing a policy for us. You can give us direction and guidance, and yeah, absolutely.
Okay, good. I hope to see that, I work for a broker with USI and we try to become heavily involved in the process for those reasons and maybe bringing up things, policies and stuff like that. I just, wondered how often that you come across that or if brokers are really being helpful in that way. So
I only work with helpful people.
Good. All right, good to hear. Actually, one more while I have you here. What is maybe one of the most, as I grow my career and about a year and a half into building my book business, but what is something more specifically a broker could do to help you, to help focus on?
I think just to let it be known that you offer more than just writing a policy, that you offer insights. So the more you educate, the better. Just let people know that you're a resource and people will flock to you.
Yeah. Okay.
That's a value add.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely more than just a renewal when you start getting to these tech companies and growing and understanding the product. So that's what we try to get across. So good to hear. Thanks, Mark.
Okay.
It looks like we have a question from Jan in the chat, and she asks, I find that many companies forget to include their packaging, shipping, and warehousing in their design and development. Have you seen this?
Luckily, the groups I've worked with have been far-sighted enough to include that. I mean, that's just part of it. So if you have a good plan, that's part of the plan. So the one with the plan wins. If you haven't planned, you're going to get at the end and say, oh my goodness, I forgot. We've got to package this and we've got to label it and we've got to ship it and store it and all this other stuff. So part of the plan, part of your requirements documents absolutely has to include that.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like some companies, like Apple, for example, their packaging is beautiful. You open your new MacBook and the box is lovely and the way it's packaged inside is really thoughtful.
They've raised the bar for everybody and it's great. I love their packaging too.
Yeah. Anyone else have a question for Mark?
Yeah,
You can,
I had a
okay.
couple of comments and questions. So I come from the pharmaceuticals world, and sort of to follow on some terminology that Doug started using, one of our challenges in pharmaceuticals is that product design lock is much, much, much earlier in the process than it is with devices or pretty much anything else. Because once you've laid down the structure of the molecule, you're done. And the other challenge is that we have a different sort of people challenge, which you might have had with the Da Vinci. I don't know if that was a PMA or 510K, but
It was a PMA for sure.
yeah. So, I mean, the challenges of developing a product that requires extensive clinical trials and inter-individual variability. And if you have any wisdom to share about either of those challenges, either the early design lock or the other sort of people problem.
Yeah. First of all, I know nothing about pharmacology or molecules, so I can't really say. It's such a different domain. I'll tell you from my colleagues who I talk to, I think devices are so much simpler. As complex as devices are, they're less problematic in terms, especially for regulatory and clinical testing, and just the amount of money it takes to develop a device is so much less than to develop a pharmaceutical. So that's why I stick to this, because I understand it and it's more doable. And the second part of your question was about the people problems.
Yeah.
Again, people are interesting and they're complex, and just having some insight into different personality types. For instance, there's so many different ways to categorize people. I mean, there are different frameworks and stuff, but really the most simple way is they're hunters and they're farmers, or quantitative folks and qualitative folks, or engineering and sales marketing folks. And one group is kind of very binary, data-driven, rational, and then the other group is very qualitative, more on the feeling side, maybe emotional. And there's an old adage that, people buy stuff because on the emotional basis, and then they use their intellect and data to justify the emotional decision they already made to buy something. So, when you buy that Porsche or that Tesla, or in the case of, it's an interesting story, my cousin Alan was the principal scientist at Apple, and they bought him a Cray supercomputer. This many millions of dollars, big computer. And I said, Alan, how much of the decision to buy this machine was rational, and how much was just kind of emotional because it was cool? And he said, 50-50. So, once you understand that human beings, we've got the left brain and the right brain, the thinking fast and slow, if you're familiar with that framework, people aren't machines. And just to acknowledge that people have their emotions and feelings and stuff gets you a long way, because that's the world we live in.
Yeah, and I was thinking more about biological rather than psychological human problems, which, I mean, in the device world, you run into, certainly in human factors testing, where inter-individual biological variability is important, but also as you go more towards the PMA products in actual clinical trials to determine clinical utility. And, at least with the Da Vinci, did you have some lessons learned in that area of?
I didn't go through that portion.
Okay.
But I imagine, when you do use testing, usability and human factors, surgeons have big hands and small hands. You've got to kind of cover all bases. So when you go to the FDA, what I do know is, you have this plan and you tell them, this is how I'm going to basically, test this, and you've got to talk about all the human factors. So you have a plan, and you basically say, we're going to look at variability among the different users. So yeah, that you don't really have a choice. It's kind of required that you take all of that into account.
Great, thank you, Mark. We had a comment and a question from Claude Goodman in the chat. He said, thank you for assisting nonprofit organizations.
Sure.
Do you know if there's something like MissionWise to help local nonprofits developing technology to support vulnerable elders during this pandemic and its aftermath?
Sadly, I'm unaware. I don't know.
Yeah, I would hope and think that there have to be some companies out there that are developing technology to help older folks stay in their home and to be able to do so safely for longer, especially during the pandemic with congregate living facilities being super spreaders of coronavirus. Yeah. Okay, well, if anyone knows of any companies like MissionWise, please put the information in the chat or chime in.
Hey there, I have a question. My name's Amy, and I am wondering, Mark, is there a company that you see as like the golden standard to following these rules and like really working really efficiently and bring stuff to the market ahead of their peers? If you had any insight on that.
Well, I'm a big fan of Apple and Tesla. It's just being really innovative. And there are many, many more than that, but those are the ones that just kind of rise to the top.
And then any in the medical sphere as much?
What's really interesting is most of the really large companies, the Medtronics, Boston Scientifics, company like that, J&J's, they don't really develop a lot of their innovations. What they do is basically they look around for smaller startups and companies that have really, new technologies, and they acquire them or partner with them, which is a huge opportunity for smaller companies. It's hard to innovate, and it's harder to innovate when you're part of a really huge company with all the baggage that comes with it.
Gotcha. Thank you.
That's great. Does anyone else have any questions for Mark before we end? I'm going to put up a poll while we're waiting, and it's just a post-program survey. If you would mind filling it out, I would certainly appreciate it. We gather this information after each of our lunch and learns just to help us improve our programming and help. And if you have ideas of any other topics that you would like to hear about, please put that in the chat, and I'll save the chat and save all your suggestions for upcoming lunch and learns. We enjoy coming up with new ideas for these programs. And any other questions from Mark while we're waiting? Looks like there's some shelf life talk going on in the chat, but I'll leave that there. Anybody who wants to save the chat is certainly welcome to do so. There's a little more button down at next to the chat that you can click on to save the chat, and it will save it to right to your computer. Well, Mark, I think that's probably looking like it on the questions. Thank you so much for presenting today, and thank you to Andrews Cooper for sponsoring this event. We certainly appreciate it, and we appreciate everybody attending and supporting OBI. And I will be sending out a recording of this program later on this afternoon or tomorrow, so look for that in your email. And I hope you all go forward and have a wonderful rest of your week.
I second that. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.